en attendant qu'on puisse échanger donc avec nos amis. Merci. Merci. Et je crois que l'un l'autre, vous nous avez dit cela en filigrane, et peut-être gardons-le pour le suivi et puis pour avoir vos témoignages. C'est tout ce thème autour de comment le Covid a un impact sur les transports, mais sur les transports formels et sur l'informel. Parce que sur le formel, c'est un sujet, mais comment aussi aborder cette question de la perte à gagner ou pas dans le secteur informel, dans nos économies. Et ça, j'aimerais bien ensuite peut-être que ceux qui veulent compléter sur la question du comment articuler ces deux niveaux-là, formel et informel, puissent renforcer ce point-là. Est-ce que par exemple ça a permis au secteur informel de grandir, mais être aussi un vecteur de propagation du Covid ou pas? Comment vous le contrôlez? Ou est-ce qu'il faut le contrôler? Donc on va garder ça un peu pour la suite. Mais si déjà certains d'entre vous veulent abonder dans ce sens, ça sera intéressant. Donc je passe la parole à madame.
Merci. On voit l'impact que la Covid a eu sur les transports urbains. Ils ont déjà cité plusieurs points. Je voudrais rappeler également que...
I'd like to recall that this had an impact on the revenues which have gone down due to the reduction in the number of travelers, and there were additional expenses to this, to the mainstream ones, that is the purchase of equipment to fight against COVID, and also when in the case of emergency in Côte d'Ivoire, and as the DG said, and for many employees who had to play and to pay a percentage during whereas the activities were discontinued temporarily, and there were also some charges we could not be and let's say comprised, and also the various taxes. So, and there was also the material due to stationery, which was temporary, which involved additional and spending because of, that's what I wanted to add.
Merci. Moi, c'est Mohamed Ibrahima. Je suis le coordinateur national de...
I am the national coordinator of Mauritania. I would like to say something regarding the impact on COVID. And there is this impact that we find in many countries. This is what Mauritania underwent regarding the COVID situation on transportation. First of all, in the first place, you have a formal and informal, and for those who do transportation by cab, and they also were affected and by this regarding the decrease of receipt, on the loss of employment, and this is quite formal, and there is also a social impact, and which caused to have a very low for those who do not have resources to pay or to rent a car. So there is imbalance from a social point of view that we have experienced in Mauritania. When it comes, it has been observed depending on the type of transport. And at a point in time, there was a problem because the business could be affected. And they allow things to pass, and then the business is developed. So this is the constraint that was there, how to harmonize this COVID-19 protocol and to have less cases. So whether this is the fight which has been, that's the observation I can make about Mauritania. It has affected the transportation industry, and there is a loss of, and in terms of the Lambda citizen, so what can be observed at a point in time, we have the feeling that everything is fine, whereas there are cases. And it's a matter of negligence and no vigilance due to the measures which have been taken that we can bring for the time being. Thank you.
Donc, Monsieur Ibrahim, bon, bienvenue au nouveau venu. Nous avons la séance.
New one. The session has been relocated, so we still have some time to discuss. As part of this first level of impact, you have other people that we talk about, let's say, temporary passage. It's all about, let's say, the provision of marketplace and the economic and of a country. Were there any breakdown in the system when it comes to provisioning, whether in the interland or outside the country? Can you shed light on to supplement this horizon? And according to you, how did COVID add on input, not only on transportation, but when it comes to shipping of goods? And could market be supplied? Did the price increase? Or when it comes to the access of the, let's say, the person which is purchasing? So was there any spread of COVID on foodstuff in a number of locations, which is seeping into another level? As you said, when it comes to the management of, let's say, COVID-19 protocol. Thank you. Generally speaking, we can easily say that COVID has affected all the segments of transport, including passenger transportation and the transportation of goods. We can talk about the greater Abidjan. We say that the feed stuff in terms of feed that come from the interland, and he said that this plague and Abidjan has been isolated for quite a while, so it is easier to believe that a large portion of the foodstuff could not gain access to the Abidjan market as it used to be in the past. So I cannot tell you to what extent this has affected us, but it is easier to say that goods transportation has been impacted adversely, just as the urban transportation industry. In this respect, the government tried to differentiate things, and there has been, let's say, a flexible handling of issues, because the main thing was to observed that people are responsible for the spread of the virus. So emphasis was laid on people, that the transportation of people was heavily impacted by the COVID-19 protocol. However, transportation of goods, due to the reduced number of people in, let's say, airways, was not processed the same way. So the transportation of goods, there was only the observation of, let's say, social distancing. You could not no longer take, let's say, 3 or 4 passengers per car. So they say that the driver and also the co-driver should be there. There will be no supporter, no, let's say, conveyor. Everything was forbidden. But when it comes to transportation of goods, were authorized to travel to and fro. So first of all, there was a need for respecting and social distancing, wearing the mask, and also washing of the hand. Moreover, every border of Côte d'Ivoire remain closed. They remain closed up to now. Our land borders are still closed, but closed to transportation of people as part of transportation by bus up to now. Up to date, international transportation of goods is not shut down, but the only condition is to comply with COVID-19 protocols, and also wearing of the mask and what have you, social distancing, and the use of sanitizers. So once these conditions are met up to now, transportation of international transportation of goods is still continued. The idea is to avoid to bring in another scourge, which is due to, let's say, the cost of living. Thank you for these details. Now I would like to give the floor to Blanche Semian. I can say that transportation of goods has been impacted, not like people, but I believe that it has been impacted, given that when the emergency and we closed down restaurants, so we understand that the customer base has reduced, and when we confine the greater Abidjan and interurban transportation was no longer working, I think that hydrocarbon transportation and have also been impacted, and also which is due to COVID-19. So all things put together, I think that transportation of goods have been impacted, as I said, not at a specific, like compared to persons, but it has been impacted. Thank you. Indeed, in Mauritania, there was an impact on the transportation of goods, especially on specific commodities. Let me take, for instance, the, let's say, staple goods. And there was a fact that happened in our country, and as far as vegetable is concerned, with the authorities.
Donc ça a impacté.
So it has really impacted the households to such an extent that we have got more awareness of the situation in African countries, for instance, where almost 60% of what we consume is imported. Just to say that we need to have more awareness, like it was said yesterday. We have therefore developed urban agriculture. That is what we are currently developing. So this has led to more awareness and this far before the outbreak of the pandemic, because there have been so many decisions that were taken, like the closure of borders and other things. So this is the contribution I could make regarding this question. Thank you, Mr. Nyang. As a matter of fact, the impact of COVID-19 on good transportation is a reality. You also spoke about the impact of the closure of borders, impact on the supply in commodities and the transportation activities as well. I think that strengthening security is a sort of alert, because food security for cities is something we should also bear in mind, because if we don't, the situation might not be as we are planning it to be. So this kind of alert is something that we need to extend, and that should lead us to the development of new things like raising or improving the food self-sufficiency of urban areas. Thank you for this panel. It was very interesting because the panelists have different backgrounds, which made it very interesting. Now, what I'm suggesting you to do with these 4 questions: impact of COVID-19, which is the main aspect of the job, the role of mobility, was there a link between the reorganization of transport and the softer mobility in a perspective of ecological transition? Because the one of the challenges facing us is climate change, for which we need to think about reducing the consumption of oils. We also spoke about how to improve the protection measures in transportation. We spoke about social distancing and other measures that are currently implemented, but are they correctly respected? You spoke about the impact on the transportation. You said something about the reduction of the number of passengers authorized in the public transportation. So it is important to think about adopting new and more efficient measures. So, ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to give you the opportunity to make your input. If you have any comments, you can also ask questions to the panelists, all of them, or one specific panelist. Can we have a microphone around? Yes, please, your question. Please introduce yourself. I'm Dr. Kofi Boadi from Lornyongede University of Daloa. I'm a geographer. I have 2 questions. The first one is to the lady. She said that she's the DG of Label Company. I know that during the hot period of the pandemic, people couldn't move out anymore. So the expenses of your of running your company, you couldn't make as much money as before, while you were still paying for the various operations in the running of your company. So I would like to know how you were assisted. What kind of assistance did you receive in order for you to be able to keep your company running? Now, the second question is to the panelists from Mauritania. I know that there's a city in Mauritania that is close to Nouadhibou, and that depends on Nouadhibou for the supply of fish. During the pandemic, there were challenges in the supply of fish. I would like to know if you have developed a specific strategy to cope with this challenge. So how did you manage? Let's take other questions or comments, input. Microphone over here. Good morning to all the panelists and good to everyone. I'm Mr. Marc Arthur Brou, Director of Parkings and Transport at Plateau Commune. I think this is a good opportunity to raise the attention of some partners in the fields of transportation, because we are looking for such partners to help us develop our transportation strategy. Mine is an input on the COVID impact on the communities. In our case, we had an unusual situation where COVID-19 has stopped a development plan that we were preparing to implement. Today, all the persons who go to Plateau know how difficult it is to find a place to park a car. So for this reason, we have developed a parking plan that is under development, and it is important to find new strategies to improve parking conditions in the municipality of Plateau. In the past, the minister as well as the director of the High Council came to see us and to negotiate some flexibility during that pandemic, because the challenge of parking had become more severe during the pandemic. So today, COVID-19 is considered by our administration as an obstacle. We also tried by ourselves to find additional solutions in terms of soft and green mobility. If you go to Plateau, you will see that we have 100 electric bicycles. We also have a plan to have clean buses that will circulate over the place. So this is part of our policy. So if we are able to develop all these projects, then we'll be able to impact the environment. Because for us, COVID-19 is a lack of response to the demand. Because as you know it, Sotra, which is the public transportation company, is currently preparing a project to deploy more buses. In Plateau, we are making sure that those who are living around the Plateau or even far from Plateau and who come in Plateau can just park their vehicle somewhere and use those public transportation means. I'm also calling all the potential partners to join us in the development and implementation of this project. Thank you very much for your testimony, whereby we understand that COVID-19 can also be turned into an accelerator for better adaptation. These ideas you have presented to us, ideas of electric bicycles or electric cars, making transportation more dynamic, are pathways that bring some hope to the current situation. It is very important to keep it in mind. Thank you for your testimony. Now, our panelists are going to give their responses to the questions. Thank you. I would like to weigh in the contribution made by the last speaker. I wanted to say that as a conclusion, but since he mentioned it, I would say that for me, COVID-19 is a kind of opportunity, because that is exactly what you said, an opportunity that leads to the reorganization of the sector. What the gentleman said applies to all the districts of Abidjan. I am a participant to the Amoga, which is an initiative for the improvement of mobility in the Grand Abidjan. There is also the RT, which is the authority for the regulation of transportation, urban transportation. These two entities are in charge of improving the conditions of transportation. Everything you said, I know about it because I'm from Cocody, and I also know about Plateau. Plateau, and I stand to be corrected by you, sir, is a place that could stand as a lab for the other districts of Abidjan, if we consider the size of that district, because you spoke about parking vehicles at the entrance of Plateau and lead people to use the electric bicycles and cars for the internal mobility. Generally speaking, this is this parking system in Cocody, like in other districts. We are thinking about how to improve parkings in terms of time, parking time, because this is important to bear in mind, because we have different parking situations. Sometimes a vehicle will come and stop at a point for a short period of time, or sometimes it will be a longer period of time. So all these aspects have to be taken into account. And the AMUGA, this organization that I'm a member of, is working on these parameters. The final objective being to improve the traffic, and also to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. Now, regarding the soft mobility, that is the use of bicycles, yes, this is part of the plan of Amuga and the district. Now, for the bicycles, we need to have additional infrastructure, like roads dedicated to bicycles. But for Plateau, it's going to be easier because they have enough space, which is not the case for other districts, where I think the experience will be extended in the future. But for Plateau, I think they have more possibility to implement this project right now. Thank you. Thank you. Like I said it at the beginning of the panel, Plateau is a specific case because they don't have a big market and they have very fewer challenges in terms of transportation. It is rather a business center. So this makes Plateau a good place for the implementation of this pilot project. Yet we still have the issue of market supply, chain supply, and other aspects. So now I give the floor to the other panelists. The first question, I think, was how we have been able to face the expenses in running our company during the pandemic. Well, these were situations we were confronted to because, you know, the water and electricity companies didn't take the pandemic into account. The landlords also didn't take it into account. Now, regarding the salaries, COVID-19 was a surprise for everybody. And since we know that the workers have to feed their families, and according to the law, if you should fire or temporarily suspend your worker, then you should give him some compensation. So this was double pressure upon us. There's also the social aspect. You know, these are people that have worked for you for years. Now that there's a situation, if you don't give them any more salary, they will not be able to face their family obligations. So it is a chain of impacts. Everyone has been impacted, whatever their position, and it is still going on. That is the answer I can give you. Now, regarding the first question, I would say that we were lucky, but I don't know if that is how to say it. You know, we have to deal with a global pandemic. And what we are living in Cote d'Ivoire, I think some aspects are experienced here and there. All countries are living the impact of COVID-19. So we wrote a letter to our partners because in Cote d'Ivoire we were already in a state of emergency that was extended, and we didn't know exactly when things would resume. We therefore wrote letters to all our partners to ask them to bear with us so that all the incurred expenses would be reported or postponed until we resume our activities. They were open to our request and they agreed to postpone the payment of those debts to other dates. I think I've answered your question. Before I give you the microphone, sir, I want to give the microphone to Mr. Jabi Ibrahim, who wants to complement what Mrs. Asemian just said. Thank you. On this, in regarding the deficit of income in the transport system, as soon as the pandemic broke out, the government took the necessary measures so that all the transportation companies that were affected could have their debt postponed, and the government also created a fund of 1,500 billions CFA francs, divided into four parts. One part was dedicated to the big companies, a second part dedicated to the SMEs, a third part dedicated to the informal sector, and the last part for solidarity, which means that in the transportation sector and other sectors impacted by the pandemics, there was a possibility for them to have that financial support if they met all the criteria. So the idea was to make sure that all the operators of the transport sectors could cover all the expenses of their companies and to be resilient to the impact of the pandemics. And all the big transportation companies that were eligible to this fund have even received up to 1 billion CFA francs to support the loss undergone. All the SMEs that were eligible received 500 million CFA francs to support the loss that they had undergone. Now, in the informal sector, even the drivers, this operation was not general, but there was a group of drivers that were allocated 300 or 500,000 in the informal sector. Some of them were given 25,000 for 3 months. It's sure that this financial assistance was not enough, but at least it was a good thing for the government to show its goodwill. I'm talking about all the sectors of activity, either hotel, transportation, trade. As long as you were an economic operator, you could be eligible and receive that financial support. It was not up to our expectations, but at least we tried to do something. So that is something I wanted to say for everyone to know it. Thank you. And of course, this is a real strategic vision implemented with the contribution of the central bank to support or assist all the economic operators. And the question here is how to reach out to the informal sector where it is difficult to take efficient actions. But it is a sector that was also exposed to the impact of the pandemic. Thank you for your contribution. Now you have the floor, sir. Thank you. First of all, it is a real pleasure to hear that the city of Kifa is being mentioned here in Abidjan. Now, coming to the question on supply in fish for the city of Kifa, there was a strategic plan that was developed in which fish were stored and sold at reasonable cost, so that any citizen with a low income could afford this fish. This initiative reinforced the existing initiative before the outbreak of COVID-19, because our concern was to facilitate the supply of fish for the cities that were far from Nouadhibou. So with the outbreak of the pandemic, this mechanism has been reinforced. I can see people coming in the room. I want to tell you that the session on transportation and COVID impact started at 9:40, so we are going to finish by 5 minutes and give the floor to those who will work on housing and the session that was planned before. So please give us a few more minutes. You are welcome if you want to participate in this session. Now we have only a few minutes left, so I will take only one last question and one word of conclusion by the panelists. We have only 5 minutes left. Please introduce yourself. I am Sanogo Mamadou, Deputy Mayor of Cocody. Now, regarding the impact of COVID-19, I have to say that in Cocody, as soon as the pandemic came, we started taking action by, first of all, raising the awareness of the population. But by April 2020, all the economic operators of Cocody have been exempted from tax, and this cost us a minimum of 200 millions. This was our contribution in terms of solidarity with our economic operators, but also as a participation to the fight against COVID-19. Thank you very much. It was very important to say that because it is an example of how the economic operators were assisted. Maybe one short comment and a conclusion by each panelist, and then we will give the floor to the next session. Thank you. Now, in terms of conclusion, we will first of all urge Label Transport Company, because during the pandemic, I remember that our department has treated reconversion of your service, because you shifted from urban transportation to staff transportation, and you were exempted from tax for this activity, because for us it was a good thing to support these companies. So I want to urge you transport companies to tell you that there's a room for transportation of workers and students. You understand that if you have a bus of 60 seats with which you can transport these specific groups, then it is a good thing. So we are going to conclude, so you will tell us your conclusion and also give us a few words in view of the future. So you have your microphones, use them please. In terms of conclusion, I will say that with COVID-19, the authorities and populations have understood the importance of transportation system, which is the backbone of our economy. Due to the reduction of transport activity, we've seen the impact on the economy. But in conclusion, I think now what matters is to see how the transportation system could be assisted and made more resilient and efficient in terms of financial assistance, training of the actors of that sector. It is the role not only of the central government, but also of the decentralized administration, so that this system can be optimized and included to an integrated transportation system with the use of BRT and other solutions. Thank you. The COVID-19 pandemic has reminded the sector of transport that it is important for government to have the means of its policy. If you are an investor, let's take the example of label company. It will cost like 100 million CFA francs. So if she has 10 buses, she is expected to have invested like 1 billion CFA francs. So you see the level of investment, and with such huge investment, you have to deal with pandemic like COVID-19. You certainly need to be assisted. Now, the government is speaking about 10 billion CFA francs as financial support, which was something significant. The second thing is that in terms of mobility, before the pandemics, measures were taken. We can see the consequences of these measures, which is a decree providing a limit to the average age of vehicles to be imported. So if this measure is extended to the road or the traffic, we will see the good impact of such measures, because today we have better conditions on our roads, because these measures are measures that fight against road or traffic conditions and also on the environment. So the pandemic came, but it raised the awareness of the government and the operators on the necessity to be ready to face different situations. Thank you for your conclusions. Now we are proceeding to the end. I give you the floor, Madam. COVID has impacted the transport sector in a significant extent. So the transport sector has contributed to stopping or reducing the spread of the disease. So because the transport sector was factor in the spread of the disease, so any action taken in that sector was for sure likely to reduce the spread of that pandemic. You know, the transportation of goods is something good which has an impact or which is useful to everyone. So we need to be assisted by the ministry and by the decentralized administration. So this is my conclusion. Thank you. Thank you for so my last word would be the need to have more support from the central government. We also need to reinforce sensitization of the populations, and we need to have more financial support for the transport sector, mainly the transport that are affected by the pandemic. Thank you. Now, this is our conclusion. Thank you to OIDP, Kokodi, for introducing you as operators of transport. You know, it was a good thing for you to be here. It is the first time that we are talking about transportation in the context of participative democracy. So this was a good thing for all of us to be awake. It's a good thing that we have had this discussion between private sector and public administration. So we can see that this topic of participative democracy, not to mention informal sector and involvement of inhabitants, is something we need to deepen, and you have facilitated the exploration of new fields, and I think it was an important outcome of this debate. So please clap for our panelists. The next session is going to start in this room, and it's going to be on housing, access to housing and health care. So those who want to participate in this session are invited to stay in the room. Otherwise, we should leave the room and give our friends the opportunity to come for their session. Thank you.